Welcome to the Concordia Publishing House podcast, where we consider everything in the light of Jesus Christ, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I'm your host, Elizabeth Pittman. On today's episode, we're joined by Reverend Philip Krupski. And during our conversation, we're going to take a close look at what it looks like for us as Christians to be faithful and thoughtful stewards of God's gifts. Phil is the Senior Vice President of Gift Planning at the LCMS Foundation, and I'd like to take a moment to thank our friends at the LCMS Foundation for their support of the CPH podcast. Imagine a future where your God-given gifts will continue to benefit your family and faith after you're called home to heaven. The LCMS Foundation will help you create a gift plan so that your assets, things like your retirement accounts, home, or land, will leave a lasting impact on the people you love and on the ministries you care about the most. You'll be able to learn more about creating your gift plan at lcmsfoundation.org. Now on to our conversation with Phil Krupski. Phil, welcome to the CPH podcast.
Thank you.
We've been privileged to have the LCMS Foundation as a support of our podcast for quite some time, and we've really been grateful for our partnership. So I'm thrilled to have you on today to chat and tell us a bit about what you do at the foundation, and then talk us through some things about generosity that we may not have thought about before.
You bet. Well, it is a big privilege for us to partner with CPH as well, and I think that's one of the greatest joys of the work that I get to do is seeing all those connections and fostering those. That's super important. I think in this day where everybody seems to separate, and appreciate you doing this podcast to help connect God's people together a lot more. So Foundation's been around about 64 years. And yet we're probably one of the least known entities of Synod, which is kind of odd in a way. And
a hidden secret, a hidden gem, I would venture to guess, right?
I would agree with that. I think there's a reason for that, and that is statistics. We deal in the realm of helping people do plain giving, which is making charitable gifts out of their estates. And people tend to put that stuff off and procrastinate about it. And so I tend to think that there's this like psychological switch that sort of goes off when people hear what we do. They're like, oh, I don't want to think about that. And I think that's to some degree why we don't have the recognition maybe that others do. And, we certainly have helped thousands and thousands of LCMS members with this process and supply millions and millions of dollars. So we're doing all the right things, but I think it's just the topic. It's kind of like going.
You think it scares people?
I do. It's kind of like going and prearranging your funeral in a way. And I always like to tell people, hey, do you believe Jesus' words? He said, I'm the resurrection of life. Whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? So if we believe that, then let's get after this and get this work done, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been at the foundation? How did you come to work at the foundation?
Yeah, I'm a pastor. Been a pastor since 1989, so it's getting to be a few years now, 33. Served in congregations for 26. And about 7 years ago, experienced what I always like to call the divine agitation, that God was kind of saying, there's something else I want you to be working on. I saw that in staff that I worked with over the years, and then I experienced it. The foundation was beginning a gift planning position in the state of Indiana, in the Indiana district. And I just couldn't ignore it. Wanted to get involved because I was tired of people saying that there's not enough money to do what God's calling us to do. And I don't believe that. I think that's like Satan's bad breath when we start believing that in the church. And so I started working as a gift planning counselor in Indiana 7 years ago. And then my boss announced that he was retiring, and everybody kind of pushed. And I ended up being here at St. Louis as the leader of the gift planning department for the foundation. So I've been in this work for 7 years, but serving God's people and really understanding financial stewardship all my adult life, really.
I think it's one of the cool things when we think about our vocations, plural, and that there are so many ways that a person can serve the church in addition to the called church worker route. We desperately need our called church workers, but as you show, and we've got lots of folks that work at the LCMS Foundation, that work here at CPH, and in countless places throughout the country, that through their vocation, they are serving the church in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of neat. And I just had this conversation with my oldest son, who's going to be a junior in high school, and he's starting to think about what he wants to do with his life. And like, whatever it is that you're called to do, you're still going to be able to serve the church through that vocation. So it's great that we have people at the foundation who are helping on the financial side of things with our members and our ministries as they think about that. So I think it's kind of a cool thing that we have.
Yeah, with me being a pastor, I bring that whole spiritual journey side of things into it. It's not just kind of a financial task that we do in gift planning, but it's really, let's walk through this thing God has prepared you for. Let's think about that. Let's pray about that. Let's be caring for people in their lives of discipleship. And I think I bring that unique perspective to it, and certainly enjoy that. So.
Absolutely. Well, talk to us about generosity. I think that some people may think of generosity in one sense, and I have a hunch that you're going to tell us that it might not be what we think.
Yeah.
How would you define generosity?
I can't put my finger on it when it seems like the word generosity really became like a dominant word among God's people in the church to describe the act of giving. I can recognize that 10 years ago, if I really think back, I was using that word generosity quite a bit in my own language and things. And certainly even up to what I would share 18 months ago, I heard everybody else using the word generosity. And I think the reason why generosity sort of became the popular word in the church is because some people had some bad experiences with the word stewardship, and they equated stewardship with some hard sell campaigns that went on in their churches to force them to up their offerings for the year. And that's the only thing they thought. And so we adopted the word generosity. But to some degree, I see the word generosity being used for the exact same purposes that people were shying away from the word stewardship. It's just now we're being cool and not using the word stewardship.
Well, and I know exactly what you're saying, because I've seen that happen. And I think people who think about it, they recognize it. And I don't think we're fooling anybody when it's presented in that way.
No, and it's a word that is used both inside and outside the church. And I think sometimes we in the church sort of like to adopt words that everybody else in the world is using and all that kind of stuff too. So even in the secular fund development world, there's a lot of talk about generosity. And so it's just easy to settle into that. But about a year and a half ago, I was driving, as I do a lot, travel for my work, and I was driving along one day, and I sort of had this little internal crisis went on that said, we teach really regularly that really none of this stuff that is in our life is our stuff. It's all God's stuff, right? I think of Psalm 50, where, God says, if I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you, because everything in the world is mine. All the insects in the forest are mine, down to that level. So it's like, if everything is God's stuff, then how can I sort of claim that I'm being generous if I give? Because generosity kind of it's like a celebration about the giver. It's recognizing that the giver is being liberal in the giving of their things in order to make somebody else's life better. And so I was like, so if these are God's things, how am I being generous? And it just sort of started a quandary going on in my brain. I knew that I'd run across the word generous in English translations of the Bible a bunch. So I was like, I need to look into that. So took a look at the origin of the word generosity. It comes from a Latin word, actually, 15th century or whatever. It meant to be of noble birth. And so the origin of generosity was these are the nobles taking care of the peasants with all of their riches, and then as those years have gone on since the 1400s, generosity generally, I mean, if you polled people, I would suppose most people would say, well, generosity means to be showing that you're a good person and doing good things and trying to create good things in your community or whatever. But there's sort of a celebration to some degree of what the giver is actually doing. And I think that from a biblical stewardship perspective, that's kind of upside down to a large degree. That ultimately, as God's people, we like to celebrate God's grace, that God gives us all his things, and he has a plan attached to those things. A verse that resonates with me a lot is Ephesians 2, verse 10, for we're God's workmanship created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God prepared in advance that we might walk in them. And so if he's provided the gifts, it's just enabling the plans that he's already prepared in advance. And that's I think the better way to think about Christians giving than rather trying to dip into that. Can I persuade you to be this really good person who demonstrates that they're really good to everybody else by your generosity? So then I started digging into the word generosity in the scriptures. And I find that, it only depends which English translation you use, but it only shows up 10 or 12 times, depending on which translation it is. From what I can sense, it seems like it was something that showed up in the King James Version, back in the 1500s when the King James Version was first translated and quickly, and scholars in England and all that kind of stuff created that English translation. Then I started looking at original language and found out that of those 12 times that the word generosity appears in scripture, there are 8 different words that really are the source of that all get generically translated as generosity. What I find in looking at the root of meaning of all those words is it's more meaning of blessing somebody. It's being kind or gracious to somebody, gracing somebody with God's grace, or certainly in a lot of Paul's writings in 2 Corinthians, emphasizing being singular or in focus or without hypocrisy, not doing something for an ulterior motive. The root word actually means to be genuine. And so, when I look at it and see those 12 times, so 12 times in the whole Bible isn't a lot to begin with. And then of those 12 times, it's really 8 different root words that are all there. I think that resounding more with those words of kindness and mercy and grace and blessing and being genuine. Those are the words that are more consistent with what our understanding of grace would be all about. So
I'm always fascinated when in Bible study, and as you've just done, you go back to the Greek and unpack the nuances that we don't get. Oftentimes our study notes may cue us into that, but without that whole kind of big picture zooming in on the various words and meanings, that context is fascinating to me. And so it's definitely a fresh look at what the word means and has implications for how we would behave today, correct?
Yeah, the practical implication of it is, if you're just looking to be really pragmatic and think, all I want to do is get somebody to give their gifts so we have enough money to pay for the ministry of the church, using the word generosity may be quicker to the punch because people already kind of understand that. But from my perspective, when people are giving, I really want to see that as helping them to be expressing their Christian faith, growing in their understanding of God's grace in their own life, and ultimately giving witness of that grace to somebody else through that giving. So to me, yes, it's a practical thing to give dollars that support ministry, but it's also, as Paul talked about when he was doing the great gathering of dollars to take back to Jerusalem to take care of the needs of the saints that were suffering from famine and persecution. He emphasized to the Corinthians that through this act it's translated as generosity in English translations, but through this act, genuine act is really the word, that there was a witness that was responding in overwhelming thanksgiving to God, because of his grace. That really is the bigger picture. And I think that gets lost if we just resort quickly to the generosity word. I think we're losing that richness. And if stewardship doesn't do it, then we got to find a better word. A lot of people will kind of fight me on it and say generosity is a great word, and it's like, well, we can take a secular word and inject a Christian understanding of it. We do it with all kinds of things, but I think there's a lot of work there, and I think there's a lot of baggage that I think that generosity is sort of triggering. An emphasis on generosity is sort of triggering that. We're going to try to elevate people's sense of who they are, and have to give them recognition for these great actions that they're doing, and that's really foreign to scriptural understanding of what giving's all about. So,
well, it sounds to me like just stopping at generosity isn't taking it far enough. And it sounds like what the foundation and your team are helping people do is take it to the next level, where more than just being generous or genuine or kind in their actions and their gifts, they're able to take that into a faithful, I think, like we've talked about the word steward, but turning that into an expression. Would that be a fair?
Absolutely. I like to summarize Christian stewardship, financial stewardship, down to doing God's things with God's things. And if you can, and it's simple, right? I mean, and I'm doing a presentation,
absolutely.
I like to repeat that several times now, and by the end, everybody can fill in the statement for me and all that. But if we can help God's people to understand, there's a freedom there. It's not me trying to have to conquer the world or worry that what I have is not enough in order to make a huge difference. Is God gave me things. It's like the parable of the talent in Matthew 25, 5 to 1, 2 to another, 1 to 1, and then going away for a while, Jesus going away, ascending, but promising that he's going to come back. And in the meantime, we get to do really good things with God's things. There's a joy and freedom that happens there if we keep it in that context.
I like that phrase a lot, because I think it makes you stop and think about the decisions that you're making every day, big ones or little ones. If you're doing things with God's things, how actually are you behaving, and what does your behavior share with your neighbor?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we, in terms of the gift planning work that we do, we do two major things here at the foundation. We help people do gift planning, which is making the estate gifts. And then we help manage those financial resources either through a gift planning instrument, a tool that somebody needs to use to achieve their goal, or even if the church receives an amount of money and they want to manage that through an endowment or through an investment account. That's what we're here for, to provide these assets that are going to support ministry. So in the gift planning world, the thing that we like to help people understand and celebrate is that the giving opportunity in our life, financial giving opportunity, goes beyond simply looking at the cash flow of dollars flowing in and flowing out of our checkbooks. And that's usually where, when churches do focus on giving, they're usually, people get tied up in a tithe of the cash flow and all that. Well, modern studies show that in the United States, that cash flow, the amount of assets that are really there, only accounts for maybe 1 or 2% of people's overall assets. And that 98% of what God's people have really is tied up in non-cash things. It's their investment accounts, their IRAs, their homes, all those kind of things. And so the church struggles and says, well, we're teaching people to tithe on 2% of what, so that means that we're trying to support all of God's work on 0.2% of what God has really put into the lives of his people. we get to open people's eyes up through the process. We call it Lifetime Plan for Giving. Sit down, very thorough, go through a survey, fill out a process. And the first goal of that discovery part of that work is helping people to celebrate how blessed they really are, to really all in one place, to see your family, your kids, your grandkids, and then your financial assets all listed out there. We encourage that discussion about all of that, to say, what are all these things that you're listing down here? We hear the stories, we eat their cookies at their tables in their houses. And God's people, when somebody says, wow, God has given me way more than I would have ever thought, then our work's easy. Then at that point, all we have to do is ask questions and say, so what do you think God's wanting you to do? And they kind of do all the work, and then we help them to do it smartly, because sometimes, people don't understand the from a tax perspective or a financial perspective, what it is that would make the smartest decision. So, if somebody has life insurance and an IRA and they want to give gifts to their family and they want to give gifts to the ministry, that life insurance makes a great family gift because there's no tax involved. The IRA gift makes sense to gift to ministry, because if you gift that to the family, then that's going to be taxed. But if I gift that taxable thing to church, they don't pay tax. And just in one simple, being smart about that, we can make sure that somebody's saving tens of thousands of dollars, of taxes that can then be applied to supporting ministry or taking care of family. So
I imagine that over your time, you and your team, as you've sat across the table with cookies and coffee with the folks that you're helping, You've heard a lot of incredible stories and seen a lot of aha moments with families. Do you have any stories that you can change the names, but are there any stories that have stuck out to you as just really cool stories about how people have been able to recognize the gifts that God has given them to steward and then turned around and used those to leave a legacy?
Yeah. This about a year ago, I started working with an individual, no names, obviously keep it confidential from that perspective, but called up, wanted to create some kind of an endowment to help support seminary students, because there's a strong passion of wanting to see future pastors trained up. And
Awesome.
so yeah, I figured you wouldn't argue with that one, right? Did most of the work with him just over the phone, because he didn't have broadband technology, couldn't do video, lived in a part of the country where we didn't really have a local gift planning counselor yet. We will there soon, but turns out to be a really significant gift. I mean, we're talking over $1 million. And part of the discussion was him telling me that he didn't want his name or his wife's name attached to this endowment. When he found out there was already an existing ministerial support endowment that we have, he's like, fine, let's use that. We don't need to make this complicated. I don't need recognition. I just want to use God's things to make good things happen. So, wrapped it all up. I never met the guy face to face. So I went to his home earlier this spring and sat there with him for 3 hours. I didn't anticipate that. Told me a whole life story, surviving 9/11, going through battle of cancer his wife was going through, and just how the Lord had sustained him with his grace. And, through all that time, we got into a discussion about understanding God's predestination of things. And I got him reading Martin Luther's Bondage of the Will. And we were having discussions about that. And I thought, this is so much deeper than just getting some dollars that are going to support ministry, right? It's somebody who his heart belongs to the Lord because the Lord claimed him in baptism years ago. And now I'm just assisting this guy to do what he knows in his heart is the right thing to do. And
But talk about leaving a lasting impact.
yes.
In such a tangible way as to help future seminarians and future pastors. That's awesome.
Yep. Most of my team really struggles to be able to retire because they don't want to lose the connection with all those amazing stories that we see over and over and over again. So
I would imagine that there are some really host of just really neat stories that your team has collected over the years. That's really cool. So thanks for sharing that. If our listeners want to learn more about getting started with a gift plan or to ask the questions, where would you direct them to go?
So we have a website like everybody does. Ours is LCMSFoundation.org. And when you get on there, there's really two opportunities to look at, either for the gift planning side or the congregational investment side. So if it was gift planning, just would stay on the gift planning side of it's right up at the top of the page. There's just a little button you click on. When you get into the gift planning part, it can be, I am an individual who's looking for information about how to do my own gift plan. Or it can be, I'm a ministry leader that would like to see this emphasis in my church. So again, you click on either one of those buttons to kind of direct, in the direction that you're looking for. There's all kinds of information there. You can fill out a simple form with your name and hit submit, and then that sends me an email, and then we get you connected with somebody in whatever part of the country you're at in order to begin this journey.
And if I remember correctly, because I believe this happened at our church, your gift planners will help work with congregations to help educate the members in an intentional way too about the services that you have at the LCMS Foundation, correct?
Yes,
I'm thinking of the transfer the blessing.
Correct. We have about 22 different gift planners scattered all across the country. And our goal is, we understand the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod was created on a congregation, by congregation basis. We're not a top-down organization. We're sort of bottom-up. And so the place to meet people is really on that congregational level. So we look to engage with congregational leaders, help them understand this grace-filled process that we do. And when we're engaged specifically with a local congregation, we call that work transfer the blessings, helping God's people transfer those blessings that are there. We do presentations and educate, and then provide the opportunity to work with a member of our gift planning team. We don't charge for those services to work with our team members. None of our donors are paying dollars like you would expect with other professionals. However many hours that takes in order to figure out and pray through and discuss what God's plan is. Mm-hmm.
No, it's a great resource. As we wrap up, share one more time where our listeners should go to get connected with the foundation.
Sure. Really 3 quick ways. The website, LCMSFoundation.org, or there's an 800 number. If you prefer that, it's 800-325-7912. Or if you like to email, it's just info at lfnd.org. That's like LutheranFoundation.org.
And we'll share those links in the show notes so our listeners can hop over there and just click the link directly if they need to. So
that's great.
And I encourage our listeners, go take a look. You'll be in good hands with our friends at the foundation to help create your gift plan. So Phil, thank you for joining us today.
Elizabeth, it's been great being with you and talking with you, and appreciate everything that you're doing too.
And we're thankful for the LCMS Foundation as well. So thanks so much, everyone, and listeners. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Concordia Publishing House podcast. I pray that this time was valuable to your walk with Christ. We'd love to connect with listeners on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Concordia Pub. Visit cph.org for more resources to grow deeper in the gospel.